Hello, welcome to Movers, Shakers, Designers, Makers. I'm Steve Carpenter, the Michael J. and Amy Rosenko Keikos Dean in the College of Arts and Architecture at Penn State. Today, I'm talking with Eleanor Gorski. Eleanor earned a Bachelor of Arts degree in art history in 1991. After graduating from Penn State, she went on to earn her Master of Architecture degree at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. These foundations set her on her career course, much of which has been with the city of Chicago. In 2009, Eleanor was the recipient of the Arts and Architecture Alumni Award here at Penn State at the invitation of her home academic department in art history. Eleanor, I have been looking forward to meeting you for several months, as you know, and I've been eager to learn more about you and your work. So thanks for being my guest today.
Thank you. I also have been eager to have this. I so love Penn State. I'm honored that you would ask me to be on this.
Absolutely. Well, we're gonna have a great conversation. So looking forward to it. Listen, before we get to the work that you're doing now, let's go back to when you were at Penn State, when you first came here to pursue your degree. What drew you to pursuing a degree in art history at Penn State?
Well, I have to say first that I'm from Pittsburgh. So a lot of universities in Pittsburgh, but what attracted me to Penn State was the campus, just the beautiful surroundings and the ability to totally immerse myself in the campus university life. And I was fortunate to go to State College all 4 years. So that also encouraged me to go to Penn State. And in terms of a major, like many undergraduates, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. You know, I was interested in many things, and that was an attraction in itself, going to a big university where you could take a plethora of different classes. You know, I was in poli-sci at one point. I actually did get a dual degree in history. I was interested in business. But what I loved about art history, I have to say, the professors in the department, just so welcoming, so good. The topics, the subject matter, and I just love the thought that history could be told through art, and that together you get a fuller picture of a civilization. So I just love that. And when I was at Penn State, I also had a work study job at the Palmer Museum.
Okay, what did you do? What was your work study job?
I worked for the registrar, Oki Lee. I think her husband was a professor as well, and she was wonderful. She was like a second mom to me, and she really taught me a lot about the museum world, and I got to know the curators and the exhibition designers, and that kind of led into my first foray into architecture and actually seeing how the exhibits came about. And then also some of the folks at the museum were involved in historic preservation locally around the Penn State area. And I ended up taking some classes in historic preservation where we actually went to some small towns around Penn State. And I got to see everything I was learning on campus come alive in these classes where we were actually working on buildings and working in communities. So just so much. It was so rich, my experience there.
So it sounds like as many people describe the undergraduate art history degree as a discovery degree. Like most people don't necessarily come to a university knowing they want to be an art historian. They discover it along the way while they're here. It sounds like you did the same thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, my high school experience did not include any mention of art history, though I know that, you know, I'm in Chicago now, and I know that my children are exposed to art history in their secondary education, where I wasn't as, you know, at all. So.
Great. Well, we are so glad that you discovered art history.
Oh, I still love it to this day.
Great. You know, so during these interviews, I like to ask my guests to share their story in their own words, rather than have me describe it, right? I could read this long narrative of who you are and what you do. But if we think of a helicopter, if you lift that helicopter up about 30,000 feet so we can take a look at your journey after Penn State to what you're doing now. What would that helicopter see? Can you give us that sense?
Before we do that, though, can I share one story I just thought of about my
Absolutely.
transition?
Yeah.
So there was a professor that came to Penn State my last year, Craig Zabel, and he had just started there, and he had come from the University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana, and his class was the history of architecture. And I was like, oh, this is something I've not taken before. Why don't I go ahead and check this out? And I realized, again, this was furthering my interest in a field that I didn't really know anything about. So I spoke to Dr. Zabel after and asked him more about that and studying that in graduate school. And as I explained to him my love of historic preservation, museum studies, and all of this, he's like, well, you should check out U of I in Illinois and Champaign-Urbana. That's where I just came from. And they have a program that merges all these things together, but it's architecture. And I was like, oh, I don't know. All the art historians hate the architects. They come and sleep through our classes and they don't pay attention. And if I do that, all the professors around here will disown me. And he's like, yeah, well, you should still check it out. I understand that. So that is how I got put on the path to become an architect. Just that conversation, just taking that class, and by him choosing Penn State to come and teach. I mean, it was all just fortuitous, right? That happened in that way. But I was right. All the art history professors were literally angry at me that I was
serious?
an architect and that I wasn't going on for further study in art history. But they got over it, obviously. It was just funny, though, to see their reaction.
That's something else.
But from 30,000 feet, I think that my path, once I saw the path where I could use my academic basis of history, art history, historic preservation that I achieved at Penn State, I put into action. And I went to the University of Illinois, did get a master's in architecture and what's called a Track 3 program, where you can get a master's in architecture having an undergrad in a different degree. And from there, my emphasis was historic preservation. So I kept that thread going. And then upon graduation, it was in a minor recession compared to some that we've lived through since then. But really, Chicago was the only city that had a market for architects. The rest of the nation wasn't really building. So that's why I ended up staying in Chicago. But it turns out Chicago is amazing for historic preservation, of course, architecture. I worked for a few architects, gained my license in that manner, but then I became interested in public service and really working in communities and looking at architecture as a way to serve the public. And that's been the thread of all the work that I've done at the city of Chicago, and now that I'm doing at the Cook County Land Bank.
Nice. Nice.
Yeah.
I'm just reflecting on, I want to know a bit more about the Cook County Land Bank Authority, but before we go there, you mentioned at the beginning that you're from Pittsburgh, and I think about the amazing history that is just built into the city through its architecture. I'm thinking about going to Illinois and doing your work there. How did you reflect on Pittsburgh differently after going back? Maybe you'd already been thinking about Pittsburgh as a historic space, although with architecture as or art history as a discovery discipline for you, maybe it wasn't until you went back to Pittsburgh, I'm assuming you'd gone back to Pittsburgh after your studies, that you maybe saw the city differently through the eyes of an art historian and through the eyes of an architect.
Oh, absolutely. And I became interested in the social aspects of why, and that's a big part of art history too. I think people don't realize you really get involved in the patrons and the historic political movements that are happening at the time, why certain artworks are created, especially those that are public, that are in churches or are integrated into buildings, they're done for a particular reason. So I came back to Pittsburgh very interested in how art and architecture were used to further the Industrial Revolution, the industrialists like Carnegie. I did a paper on the Carnegie Library near my house and why that architect was chosen and the type of architecture that was used in that library. For my thesis at U of I did study an old church and school that had been abandoned. It was sold, and then it was sold by the Archdiocese of Pittsburgh. Those were vacant. And I did an adaptive reuse study to show how they could be developed into housing. And it actually ended up happening. While I was there, a developer saw me sketching the building, checking it out, and said, "Hey, I'm going to buy this. Why don't we work on this together?" And it was on the south side of Pittsburgh. And I think that was at the very beginning of the revitalization of Pittsburgh that you see today. I grew up in the time period where there was the decline from the steel industry. So I think that was just taking hold as I left Pittsburgh. But yeah, definitely, I see it differently now. And my kids would say I see that everywhere. So
They're kind of used to the way
we take. Yeah.
I'm sorry?
Every trip we take.
They know you're going to make a comment on buildings. Yeah, got it. So let's get back to the Cook County Land Bank Authority. What I understand, organizations like this have a huge impact on the community, which that's got to be satisfying to you to be involved in that kind of work. So can you tell viewers who might not know about the Cook County Land Bank Authority what it is and what you do?
Yeah, so what the land bank does is we take vacant land, vacant buildings, basically tax delinquent structures that for various reasons don't have a clear title or clear ownership. And we are able, through the powers of Cook County, to clear up back taxes. We often negotiate liens and other fines that are against a property, take it into our inventory, and then assemble these parcels into developable parcels, or we sell the buildings often to BIPOC entrepreneurs or homeowners in the neighborhood or small local developers. So it's also a business generation tool to encourage these small companies, these small investors to give back to their neighborhoods. And no surprise, many of these properties are in the more distressed areas of Chicago and of Cook County. These are areas that we consider disadvantaged, that have historically not been invested in and suffered from historic redlining, things like that.
So again, it seems like an odd, I shouldn't say odd necessarily. It doesn't seem like a usual leap from art history to architecture to this community-based work and restoration. Like it makes perfect sense, but it's not a usual path, is it?
No, and in fact, my foray into city government really is full of, talking to politicians and getting involved in legislation and writing laws and zoning and things like that. And a lot of my friends from art history are like, can you even believe that you're doing this? And what I have found is learning all of these, again, my basis in a liberal arts education at Penn State, it's made me hungry to learn every aspect of the work that I do, and it's a means to an end. I'm very open to learning how to finance a deal if it preserves a neighborhood, if it preserves a building that goes back to those roots. So everything that I do ties back to that love of community, of history, of architecture. And, before coming to the land bank, I spent many years at the city of Chicago in the planning department. And I started in historic preservation, where as an architect working in over 50 historic districts in the city. But then I moved on to running our finance division, and then running the planning and design division for the city in the Department of Planning. And again, each one of these leaps was for a purpose to either, preserve buildings through tax incentives, or to come up with neighborhood plans that would preserve not just the historic aspects of Chicago, but also the neighborhood structure and control development in a way that was compatible with the city. So now I'm doing the same thing, and I'd like to apply that knowledge to neighborhoods in need. And just because they're in need and lack disinvestment, they have many treasures, and both the people that live there as well as the architecture. So it's that experience that I want to bring to like a different part of this field.
Mhm. It makes sense.
If that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And as you just provided that response, just the way in which you're talking about the communities, not as an arrangement of buildings and streets and services. You're talking about communities as places in which people live, and I think that sense of community as a living entity, that these are people with their own histories. These are folks with stories to tell, who have lived there, who people have come in and out of those neighborhoods or those spaces. Community is alive, but some people might think about planning as, no, we need to know where the streets and the buildings are, and that's the extent to which it plays out. For you, it's really about the people. That's what I'm hearing. Maybe I'm projecting, but I'm hearing you really invested in what it means to be a neighbor and a member of the community in that way.
Absolutely. And that's why I value all of the time that I've been able to spend in public service in the city, to be able to know the community groups, their needs and wants, and what each individual neighborhood is like. And in that way, Chicago is like Philadelphia or like Pittsburgh, where you have these enclaves of different nationalities that settled here. Each neighborhood is unique, and you need to understand that to know even how to approach a project, or what their concerns are with their vacant buildings, where they want to go from here. So people come first, absolutely, in any of this work. Yeah,
that's lovely to hear. Certainly, as a land grant institution here at Penn State, we think about what impact and influence we have on the people across the Commonwealth, and that's really ingrained in or central to what you're interested in is the people piece, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And so I mentioned at the top that you are an alumni award winner from the college. There's another award I want to talk about, and that's the Rome Prize, the American Academy in Rome. And from what I understand, in the midst of your work with the city of Chicago, in 2003, you received the Rome Prize in Historic Preservation and Conservation. The Rome Prize is a prestigious international award. It's given out to a select group of individuals every year, and you are among the few Rome Prize recipients. So I'm thrilled to talk to you for that reason alone, not to mention the other reasons that we're talking. So I want to hear more about this experience. What was your experience like being in Rome, and how did that experience influence you professionally and personally?
Yeah. So of course it was incredible. You get to choose if you can take 6 months or a year to spend in Rome. And at that point in my career, I felt that I could only spend 6 months, sadly. But I was given a leave of absence from the city. And I have to say that Mayor Daley was the mayor of Chicago at that time, very interested in urban spaces and design. He was a total proponent of me going and then coming back and bringing what I learned back to the city. So that was a joy in itself. But going there, you live for 6 months, you live and breathe design, and you're there with scholars of ancient architecture, ancient literature, also art historians and musicians and painters, visual artists. So it's a community where everyone gathers, once or twice a day at lunch for coffee. The rooms are shared in a villa atmosphere, and we often collaborated on projects. And in fact, my husband was an architect, and he helped to draw plans to illustrate one of the scholars' papers about the Roman Forum. So there was always this cross-pollination, I guess, of ideas there. And what I got really interested in, and I was studying historic preservation, was blending old and new. And how do Romans live within the historic, weight of their city, but still develop, new buildings and forward-looking designs. Zaha Hadid was designing a new museum when I was there. Richard Meyer was building a new building to encompass an old Roman altar that was under construction. So I interviewed a lot of folks in government and in planning in Rome in particular, and then architects that were working on both of those projects to understand how they approach historic preservation in that way. And I was able to bring that back to Chicago and came up with some historic preservation planning documents for our downtown that integrated new construction in with historic buildings. And it was more of a forward-looking document than I think the US typically allows. The US is actually a lot more stringent when it comes to historic resources than I found the architects and the municipalities in Europe. So I was trying to bring some of that back with me to the US, and I believe we were able to achieve it. And I pursued that in a few other historic districts here, one of which is Fulton Market, which is a meatpacking area in Chicago that is now one of the fastest growing office mixed use districts in the country. So, but we landmark a small portion of it, but allowed for growth otherwise.
So achieving that balance.
Yeah. But also being at the academy too, I just gained a new appreciation for technical historic preservation. Where we were located was very close to the International Conservation of Monuments and Sites, a UNESCO group that has a library that deals with totally geeky things like preserving statues and stone and all of this stuff. And I believe it was Yale that had a summer program there that I was able to interact with quite a bit as well. So it was just wonderful.
It sounds wonderful, and to be around other people like yourself at a high level of achievement from multiple disciplines, where those disciplines merge, overlap, they become they blur in the conversation, but yet people still are grounded in their discipline. And then you take that back with you back home. You probably, I'm imagining, most people wouldn't consciously say, okay, I learned these 7 things while I was there and I'm going to implement them. You go back and you do your thing, and that experience informs what you do. And I would imagine at certain moments, oh yeah, I had a conversation with so-and-so, or maybe this other person that I met there would be able to help me out with this piece of it. I think it's fascinating when we have these kinds of experiences away from where we typically are, and then we come back to where we work, and we're richer for it, and we have different perspectives because of that experience we just had.
Absolutely. And in fact, I did a lookbook for the mayor when I came back of just different urban solutions, everything from dog parks to crosswalks to how outdoor markets were set up and contained and made safe, pop-up markets. So it was more than, yes, the larger conversations are very good, but it was also just seeing how these cities function. And in addition to Rome, I went to Berlin and Amsterdam too, to experience, their cities in that way as well.
Yeah, while you're in the neighborhood, you might as well go there, right? Go to those other places.
That's right.
That's fantastic. So, Eleanor, the conversations I've had with alumni over the past year or so, now pretty close to 2 years doing these interviews, have included accounts of the pandemic, right? So most
Yeah.
of these conversations have happened within the pandemic space, and unfortunately, it's still with us now. We're talking in late April of 2002. So at this point, almost 2 years, we're past 2 years into the pandemic. We've also seen an increase in attention to social issues of a range of topics: racial injustice, climate change, political, disconnection. Can you share a little bit about how your professional life has been affected by these contemporary issues and circumstances over the past couple of years?
Sure. So when the pandemic started, I was at the city of Chicago as first deputy in our planning department, planning and economic development. So certainly Chicago, as most major cities, we had civil unrest, and a lot of it happened in our retail and commercial centers, not just in our main commercial center, but also in the neighborhoods around the city. And right away, our mayor organized us, her cabinet, as kind of a SWAT team to address certain areas and certain neighborhoods. And that was to both talk to the retailers, the small business owners, and literally visit them and give them reassurance that we were listening, we heard what was going on, and to provide resources. So much of that summer, I was on the ground, actually in the neighborhoods, constantly, talking with folks, making sure they got resources. And it was basics like board up materials, or having, Streets and Sand come and clean up what was left over from, a protest the day before. But it was also trying to coordinate resources to actually address the pandemic too. Figuring out where we could have drive-through testing centers. And I think anyone who worked in the public and city government or local government was brought to bear on solutions for these things. And then a lot of my staff who were planners, architects, had to work in other areas of the city, and they were asked to volunteer at COVID centers. So we had, all hands on deck for the response. But I would say that that's partially why I did change with my line of work. It did have a big effect on me because I was able to see even more clearly how the pandemic made the neighborhoods that I work in now really disproportionately affected them in terms of food insecurity, in terms of violence, and then recovering from all those things. Most neighborhoods bounce back quickly here in Chicago. There are some that I'm concerned will not bounce back, which really helped me turn my focus and my skill set to helping with that problem. So that did lead me to the Cook County Land Bank as a way to help, in a small part from my background, to help what we're seeing in these areas.
Yeah, what you're sharing about the pandemic, and not necessarily the pandemic itself or the various social issues, but the overlapping of them at the same time, really puts a lot of pressure on a structure. And by structure, I'm not meaning a built structure. I'm talking about a social,
That's right.
institutional structure that maybe had already been weak for a while, but was able to keep itself sturdy. But that added pressure all at the same time, that was enough to reveal the fractures and enough to reveal points of failure, and in some cases that were irreparable and needed to be adjusted differently. So
that's right.
It seems that I mean, I'm hearing that in what you're saying as well.
Absolutely, yeah. And I, as everyone says, I think it will be years for us to actually reckon what everyone has gone through and how to write this. And I'm happy to say that, my work, we're benefiting from federal funds that are coming to the city and to Cook County. And I'm fortunate to be part of the team that is looking at how to distribute those resources so that it's equitable, and it really lays, hopefully, stronger foundations. So when and if this happens again, that these communities are more resilient, and that we're, able to address some of these systematic issues.
Absolutely. No,
Yeah.
this is important work.
Yeah.
And you're talking about the present, but you're also talking about how this work in the present informs or could inform future practice. And I always like to ask my guests about looking forward and how they might see themselves ahead in the future. So what are you, I mean, you're already mentioning what you're working on now, but is there an element of that that's even more exciting than other pieces? Are you optimistic about something? What are you hopeful about? What are you looking forward to working on as things move forward?
Well, as we've talked about through the call, it's all about people and the neighborhoods you're in. So what I am excited about is my organization historically had done one-off developments or one-off sales to a single developer. What I've started to do is create agreements where we'll have an agreement with the city of Chicago or another municipality or a nonprofit organization to take all of the vacant buildings or land in a neighborhood and come up with a redevelopment structure, and then look at how to fund it over a number of years, employing people in the community and creating affordable housing. So again, bringing to bear what I've learned throughout my career in terms of finance and zoning and entitlements, and then empowering the community to choose their own path and providing them the tools to do that is what I'm looking forward to. So we're starting out with a few pilot projects now this year, and looking to partners like various large banks, national banks, to help fund this, as well as nonprofit organizations to provide guidance. But I'm hoping that the next time we talk, we'll have some projects underway, and we'll be able to show those as national models. So there is good that can come out of a situation like this. And I think that all these institutions that I've mentioned understand the serious issues we have, and that now is the time to jump in and try to address them. So we're hoping to take advantage of that in these neighborhoods.
You mentioned, you're hoping some good, or there is evidence that something good can come out of these moments of crisis or challenge. And the kind of good you're talking about is not self-serving. It's not selfish. You're talking about the kind of good that benefits other people that you might not ever encounter, people who will be, future generations of people. I think that's among the most wonderful gifts that we can give the world, is the work that we do that will carry on after us. Do you see your work in that way, or are you just kind of, it's helpful and I'm helping these folks, but like how far ahead are the flashlights for you? Are the headlights are for you?
It's interesting because, I've worked on some very big projects, like the renovation of Wrigley Field, which is the second oldest ballpark in the US, nationally, internationally known. It was a 5-year project, and that was truly historic preservation and updating it so that the Cubs stay in Chicago and it's preserved for another 200 years. So I do see a legacy there, right? But that's a single building.
Right.
And this is even more important because I care about the city I live in, and these neighborhoods where I'm working now. They always say that your city is only as great as the least among you, right? So for Chicago to truly be a great city, or any of the cities, that these big cities around the country, we need to make sure that the least among us, the disadvantaged, are no longer disadvantaged. They need the same rights, the same resources as everyone in the city. So in a way that is selfish, because I care about my city. I want to see this happen. And hopefully I'll just lay the groundwork, and I will retire someday, maybe back to Rome, I don't know, but I want to lay the groundwork so that these communities can help themselves. That's what really needs to happen.
That's, yeah, I
Yeah.
hear you. But I'll tell you what, Eleanor, if what you just described is acting selfishly, I hope that more people become selfish soon. It's just important work that
Yeah.
you're doing.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So, we're nearing the end of our time together.
Yeah.
So, and you mentioned, hopefully the next time we meet, some of these projects will be underway. We can talk about it. So that's fantastic. I'm eager to have that next conversation with you. But if I can go back now to sort of begin to pull this together, at the beginning of our conversation, I asked you about what prompted you to study art history at Penn State. Sometimes I frame it as, how did art history find you?
Yeah.
But this question kind of bends on that a little bit. So I wonder about what you know now that you wish you might have known when you were 18 or 20, right? Or assuming that's maybe when that's like typically like a key moment, right? Where people are finishing high school, typically entering college or whatever they're doing. There's an end of one part of ourselves and moving into the next phase. So if you could talk to that 18 or 20-year-old Eleanor, what advice would you give her?
I think I would say to have more confidence in your abilities. I think that my confidence grew over time. Because, it wasn't automatic for me to think of a career that was as technical as architecture. That wasn't something I gravitated towards. And it really was through the encouragement of my professors at Penn State and the resources I had available there that gave me that confidence. And if I could go back, I would say, you know what, just try it. Just try it and see how you like it. Don't be afraid of it. But I'd like to think that young people now, especially women, don't have that much of an issue. I think that is something that's evolving in architecture, certainly, but also I would say just in general in society. That's I don't think it's much of an issue that now as it was then for me. But that's what I would think. And also travel more.
I cannot argue with you about traveling more.
Yeah.
Traveling more is great. So the advice you just gave, travel more and just try it. Just, a little more self-confidence. Would that younger Eleanor have listened to you? Would she have listened to that advice?
Oh, good question. Maybe if I was a mentor. If I just told her that, no. But I think that's what makes a difference, the real connection. And the folks I mentioned in our conversation that I had there at Penn State, they didn't tell me that, but I think through their actions and through their caring and just being around them daily, they showed that and they helped to give me that. So I think in a way, the younger Eleanor did learn that.
Good for her. I'm so glad she did. I am so glad she did. Well, listen, I have enjoyed this conversation tremendously. We're going to have the next one whenever it plays out. And I'll catch up with whatever achievements and contributions you've made to working with communities and restoring, but also preserving and advancing what the lives of communities can be and so that they can thrive. But I'd like to end with a series of questions, really quick questions. I know I kind of set you up and said, we're going to end. And then I said, we're going to have some more questions, but this is how this works. I have a few questions that little sentence, you give me a response, sentence, response.
All right,
and we'll
I'm ready.
see how this plays out. And the hitch here is that all of these questions relate to Penn State.
Okay.
All right. Are you ready? I know them. Well, theoretically, you're an expert. You went to school here, so some degree of Penn State expertise will be at play. Are you ready?
Okay.
Who was, and some of these might be repeat questions, but this one I think refers back to some of the things that you said earlier. You can use them in responses here is what I'm clumsily trying to explain. Who was one person of influence to you during your time at Penn State?
Oh gosh, Craig Zabel.
Craig Zabel, you mentioned him earlier and you
Yes.
mentioned him now, and I'm going to mention to him that I talked with you, and
Good.
so he'll be able to watch this as well. Let's think about a moment or experience that stands out for you at your time at Penn State.
Okay.
And why? Why was it? What's the moment and why does it stand out?
My first football game, and just hearing everyone cheer and the roar go throughout the stadium. And I just felt so proud to be there and seeing the mountains beyond, and just proud to be a Penn Stater and to be part of that community.
That's a powerful roar going
It
around the stadium.
is.
Over
It is.
100,000 people all roaring. Yeah, no, that cheer is incredible. I agree.
Yeah.
So imagine you come back to campus. We have, we pick up this conversation. Maybe we've had 2 or 3 conversations before, but you're here, and we wander down to the creamery. What flavor are you ordering?
I they probably still have it. It would be peachy paterno.
Peachy paterno. Listen, there are no wrong answers when you went to that question.
Okay.
Very similar to a previous question about the young Eleanor.
Yeah.
But if you could give advice to an incoming Penn State student, a student that you don't know,
Yeah.
And to help set them up for success at Penn State, what would you tell them?
I would say, don't overbook yourself, and take classes that you're interested in. Take a variety of classes. And I very much still believe in the liberal arts approach. You can get an advanced degree if you want to focus on something, but really, really explore and see what you're interested in. And also drop a class. If you don't like the professor, or you don't like the topic, it isn't what you thought it would be. There's a lot of ways that you can experience the university, and they'll work with you on that. I think that's what I would advise. And I have 2 kids that are about to go, one into high school, one to college, and that's what we do talk about.
Fantastic. Well, they have some good advice coming from someone who has lived that advice. You've traveled, you've moved in and out of adjacent areas of interest, and it sounds like progressively doing more and more incredible things with every step of the way. So
thank you.
You're very welcome, Eleanor. It's been a pleasure to chat with you. I'm looking forward to our next conversation, and sharing some ice cream as we do that. So
that sounds great.
Great.
So nice to talk with you. Thank you.
Thank you.